Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sleepless Campfire. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of America, places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Across these hills, rivers, and empty towns are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts. Each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. The Navajo Nation spans over 27,000 square miles across Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. Its tribal police handle thousands of calls each year, but some remain unexplained. These are 7 of those cases. Now, let us begin. With our first story, it was late November of 2018 when dispatcher Eleanor Bigay began her shift at the Navajo Nation Police Department in Shiprock, New Mexico. The control room hummed with the low thrum of computers and the occasional crackle of radios. Outside, the high desert night had already fallen, bringing with it a cold that seeped through the building's walls despite the heating system's best efforts. Eleanor had worked these night shifts for 6 years, developing a routine that helped her stay alert through the quiet hours when most of the reservation slept. The night began like any other. Eleanor logged the routine calls, a noise complaint in Window Rock, a request for a wellness check in Kayenta, a report of stray livestock blocking a road near Chinle. She handled each with practiced efficiency, her voice calm and measured as she dispatched officers to their locations. The large map on the wall before her was dotted with small lights indicating patrol units moving across the vast territory. Around 2:17 a.m., as the night reached its deepest point of stillness, a call came in that would break the monotony and remain in Eleanor's memory for years to come. The call registered on her system as originating from a cell phone along Highway 64, between the small communities of Nageezi and Bloomfield. The connection was poor, with static interrupting the transmission. "Navajo Nation Police, what is your emergency?" Eleanor asked, her fingers already poised to type the caller's information into the system. For several seconds, she heard only static and what sounded like wind whistling past the phone's microphone. Then a voice emerged, faint, strained, and speaking in Navajo. "They're here," the voice said. "They're all around me. Please send help." Eleanor immediately asked for the caller's location and name, but the response was more static and another whispered phrase in Navajo before the line went dead. Eleanor attempted to call back, but the number would not connect. She checked the cell tower data and found that the call had pinged off a tower near Nageezi. But something was unusual. The highway in that area had been closed for construction for over a week, with no authorized vehicles permitted to pass through. She radioed Sergeant Thomas Yazzie, who was patrolling approximately 15 miles east of that location. "Sergeant Yazzie, I received a distress call from Highway 64 between Nageezi and Bloomfield." The caller sounded panicked, but the line disconnected before I could get complete information. Thomas responded immediately, his voice clear through the dispatch speakers. "That highway's been closed, Eleanor. No one should be out there." Despite this observation, he turned his patrol vehicle toward the location. The night air was crisp as Thomas drove west, his headlights cutting through the darkness. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the desert landscape. As he approached the construction zone, he saw that the barricades were still in place, untouched. Thomas stopped his vehicle, grabbed his flashlight, and proceeded on foot past the barriers. The highway stretched before him, empty and silent. Construction equipment sat dormant along the shoulders. Thomas swept his beam back and forth, looking for any sign of a vehicle or person. He walked nearly half a mile, finding nothing but tire tracks from the construction crew's vehicles. The temperature had dropped significantly, and his breath formed small clouds in the air. As he reached the point where the cell tower data indicated the call had originated, he stopped and scanned the area once more. Nothing. No vehicle. No person. No sign that anyone had been there recently. Thomas reported back to dispatch. "Eleanor, there's nothing out here. The barricades haven't been disturbed. No vehicle tracks besides the construction crews. I'm going to check the surrounding area, but it looks like no one's been here." As he spoke, his radio crackled with interference, unusual for this area with normally clear reception. Then, through the static, both Thomas and Eleanor heard a faint whisper, what sounded like the same voice from the original call, saying something in Navajo before dissolving into static. Thomas immediately drew his weapon and scanned the darkness around him. "Dispatch, did you hear that?" Eleanor's response came quickly, her voice now showing a hint of concern. "I heard it, Sergeant." Sounded like the same voice. The following morning, Sergeant Yazzie and 2 other officers conducted a thorough search of the area. They found no evidence of any vehicle or person having been there. The construction crew confirmed that none of their workers had been on site that night. Eleanor checked the phone number that had made the call, but it was registered to a prepaid phone with no owner information available. The call log showed only that 1 call had been made from the device. The Navajo Tribal Police filed an incident report, noting the unusual circumstances and the unexplained voice transmission that had occurred during Sergeant Yazzie's search. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor researched what the voice had said in Navajo. A colleague who was fluent in the language translated the phrases for her. Their hear was accurate. But the second phrase, the one heard through Thomas's radio, was more troubling. Roughly translated, it meant, "They don't walk on the ground." The case remained open but inactive, with no additional calls from that number or any further incidents reported in that area. Eleanor continued her night shifts, but she never forgot the voice that had called from an empty highway, speaking words that seemed to defy explanation. It was early March of 2019 when Officer Michael So began his evening shift at the Navajo Nation Police Department in Page, Arizona. The desert spring brought unpredictable weather, and tonight was no exception. Dark clouds gathered over the canyonlands as Michael received his patrol assignment and the keys to his vehicle. He had been with the tribal police for 3 years, transferring from the Phoenix PD after growing tired of city life. The vast, open landscapes of the Navajo Nation had called to him, offering a different kind of policing challenge, one that required self-reliance and an understanding of both the land and its people. Michael's patrol area covered the eastern section of the reservation, including the remote regions near Canyon de Chelly. The first few hours of his shift passed uneventfully. A traffic stop for a broken taillight in Jadito, a response to a minor fender bender near Ganado, assistance to a motorist whose car had overheated on Highway 191. As midnight approached, Michael decided to drive the back roads that wound through the sparsely populated northeastern corner of his territory. These roads saw little traffic at night, but occasional reports of illegal dumping and trespassing made regular patrols necessary. The storm that had been gathering finally broke around 1:30 a.m. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, limiting visibility and turning the dirt roads to mud. Michael considered returning to the main highway, but decided to continue his route, reducing his speed as his tires slipped in the muddy ruts. Lightning illuminated the landscape in brief flashes, revealing the dramatic red rock formations that surrounded him. It was during one of these flashes that Michael first noticed something unusual: lights in the canyon below where no lights should be. He stopped his patrol vehicle, killed the engine, and rolled down his window. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, and in the brief moments between lightning strikes, he could clearly see several lights moving in the canyon, approximately 300 yards below his position. They were not vehicle headlights. Too small, too mobile, and they moved in patterns that defied natural explanation. Michael grabbed his binoculars from the passenger seat and trained them on the canyon. Through the lenses, he could see the lights more clearly now. They seemed to float, pulsing with a soft, blue-white glow, moving both horizontally and vertically along the canyon walls. Michael radioed dispatch. Dispatch, Officer Tso. I'm approximately 10 miles northeast of Lukachukai on County Road 7. I'm observing unusual lights in the canyon below my position. Multiple lights, blue-white color, moving in what appears to be a coordinated pattern. The dispatcher, Maria Chi, responded promptly. Officer Tso, we have no reported aircraft in your area. Can you describe the lights in more detail? As Michael attempted to formulate a response, one of the lights detached from the others and began moving directly toward his position, ascending the canyon wall with impossible speed. Michael felt a cold dread wash over him as he watched the light approach. It moved not like a helicopter or drone, but with an unnatural smoothness, never wavering or hesitating despite the rocky terrain it traversed. Dispatch, one of the lights is approaching my location rapidly. I'm returning to my vehicle. Michael started the engine and locked the doors, his heart rate accelerating despite his efforts to remain calm. The light continued its approach, stopping approximately 50 yards from his vehicle. Through his windshield, Michael could see it more clearly now. A sphere of blue-white light approximately 6 feet in diameter, hovering silently above the ground. Maria's voice came through the radio, filled with concern. Officer Cho, are you okay? We're sending backup to your location, but they're at least 30 minutes out. Michael picked up his radio handset, his eyes fixed on the light outside. Dispatch, I'm okay. But this is unlike anything I've ever seen. The light is just hovering there. No sound, no visible means of support. As he spoke, the light began to move again, slowly circling his patrol vehicle. Michael grabbed his flashlight and shone it toward the light, but the beam seemed to be absorbed rather than reflected. For what felt like an eternity, but was actually less than 5 minutes. Michael sat trapped in his vehicle as the light circled him. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the light shot straight up into the stormy sky and vanished. Michael took several deep breaths, trying to calm his racing heart. He radioed dispatch again. Dispatch, Officer Tso. The light has departed. I'm continuing to observe the canyon. Through his binoculars, he could see that the remaining lights were also ascending, disappearing into the clouds one by one, until the canyon was dark once more. When backup arrived 25 minutes later, led by Sergeant Daniel Bigay, they found Michael sitting in his patrol vehicle, systematically documenting everything he had witnessed. Daniel approached cautiously, noting Michael's pale complexion. Mike, you okay? Dispatch said you had some kind of encounter. Michael nodded, handing Daniel his notepad. Better if you read it, Dan. I'm still processing what I saw. Daniel read through Michael's detailed account, his eyebrows rising in disbelief. The 2 officers, along with the backup unit, spent the next hour searching the area for any evidence that might explain the phenomenon. They found nothing. No tracks in the mud where the lights had moved, no disturbance of vegetation, no evidence of aircraft or drones. The storm had washed away any traces that might have existed. The following day, a more thorough search was conducted, including aerial surveillance, but it yielded no results. Michael filed a detailed incident report, including sketches of the lights' movements and their characteristics. The report was forwarded to both tribal authorities and the regional FAA office, but no explanation was ever offered. In the months that followed, Michael struggled to make sense of what he had witnessed. He had always considered himself a rational person, grounded in evidence and observable facts. Yet the lights he had seen in the canyon defied rational explanation. Other officers in the department were supportive, but Michael could sense their skepticism. He requested a transfer to a desk position 6 months after the incident, citing the need for a change after 3 years of patrol work. The official explanation for the lights remains unidentified aerial phenomena. But Michael knows what he saw that rainy night in the canyon. Something beyond current understanding, something that moved with purpose and intelligence through the stormy darkness. It was late January of 2021 when Deputy Sarah Nez began her shift at the Navajo Nation Police Department in Tuba City, Arizona. Winter had settled firmly over the high desert, bringing freezing temperatures and occasional snow that transformed the landscape into a stark white canvas. Sarah had grown up in the region, joining the tribal police after college with the hope of serving her community. She knew the land intimately, its seasonal patterns, its hidden dangers, and the stories passed down through generations about things that walked in the night. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. An elderly woman from Moenkopi reported that her grandson had not returned from a walk he had taken nearly 3 hours earlier. The grandson, 23-year-old Tyler Benally, had told his grandmother he was going for a short walk to clear his head, taking a path he knew well that led to a small mesa about a mile from their home. When he hadn't returned by 11:30 p.m. and wasn't answering his phone, she had grown worried and called the police. Sarah took the call, recognizing the grandmother's voice from previous community interactions. Sarah arrived at the Benally residence just after midnight. The snow that had fallen 2 days earlier still covered the ground, providing a perfect surface for tracking. Tyler's grandmother, Mrs. Gloria Benally, met Sarah at the door, her face etched with worry. "He's never done this before, Deputy. Tyler is responsible. He would have called if he was going to be late." Sarah nodded reassuringly. "We'll find him, Mrs. Benally. Can you show me where he started his walk?" Gloria led Sarah to the back of the house, where a clear set of footprints led away from the door and toward the mesa. Sarah radioed dispatch to request additional officers for a search party, then began following the tracks. The footprints were unmistakable. Tyler's distinctive size 11 boots, with a partially worn sole on the left foot that created a unique pattern in the snow. Sarah followed the tracks methodically, noting how they led directly toward the mesa as Gloria had described. The night was clear and cold, with a full moon that illuminated the landscape with an ethereal glow. About half a mile from the house, Sarah found something unusual. A second set of tracks that appeared to join Tyler's, coming from an area of dense vegetation where no one should have been. These new tracks were strange. Barefoot prints despite the freezing temperatures, with an unusually long stride and a depth that suggested tremendous weight. Sarah radioed dispatch again. "Dispatch, Deputy Nez. I've located the missing subject's tracks heading toward the mesa. There's a second set of tracks that appear to join his. Unusual characteristics. Barefoot prints in the snow, despite the temperature being approximately 22 degrees. Requesting additional units with tracking experience." The dispatcher acknowledged, informing Sarah that Sergeant James Tso and 2 other officers were en route to her location. Sarah continued following the tracks, her hand resting on the butt of her sidearm. The 2 sets of footprints moved together now, Tyler's boot prints alongside the strange barefoot ones. The stride length between the barefoot prints measured nearly 6 feet, far beyond normal human capability. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature as she considered what could make such tracks. She had heard stories from her grandparents about beings that walked the desert at night. but had always dismissed them as folklore meant to keep children from wandering after dark. The tracks led to a small clearing at the base of the mesa. Here, Sarah found Tyler's cell phone lying in the snow, its screen cracked but still functional. The last activity showed a text message sent to his girlfriend at 9:15 p.m. "Something weird out here. Following it." Sarah's unease grew as she examined the area more carefully. The tracks continued beyond the clearing, circling the mesa once before heading toward a rocky outcropping to the east. What Sarah found next made her blood run cold. The tracks ended abruptly at the base of a sheer rock face approximately 30 feet high. Sarah was examining the termination point of the tracks when Sergeant So and the other officers arrived. James approached cautiously, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "What have you got, Sarah?" Sarah pointed to the tracks. Tyler's boot prints and these other ones, barefoot, impossibly long stride. They both end here at this rock face. No tracks leading away, no indication of how they could have continued. James knelt to examine the prints more closely, his expression growing grim. "I've never seen tracks like these before. The depth suggests at least 300 pounds, but the shape is definitely human." The search party expanded as more officers arrived, including several volunteers from the community familiar with the area. They worked methodically through the night, following standard search procedures but finding no additional clues. As dawn approached, they made a disturbing discovery. Tyler's tracks reappeared approximately 50 yards from where they had ended, but now they were moving away from the mesa, back toward his home. The barefoot tracks were gone. What was most unsettling was that Tyler's footprints now showed a different pattern. Deeper impressions, as if he was carrying a significant weight, and an irregular stride that suggested difficulty walking. The officers followed the tracks back toward the Benali residence, their concern growing with each step. Approximately 200 yards from the house, the tracks ended again. This time, they didn't resume. The search party spread out, checking every possible hiding place, but found nothing. As the sun rose fully, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape, they made a final, heartbreaking discovery. Tyler's body lying in a small depression in the ground, partially covered by snow. Sarah approached cautiously, already knowing what she would find. Tyler was fully dressed, wearing the same boots that had made the tracks. His body was cold, but rigor mortis had not yet set in, indicating he had died within the last few hours. There were no visible injuries, no signs of a struggle. His expression was peaceful, almost serene. The medical examiner who arrived later would determine that Tyler had died from exposure. But the circumstances remained unexplained. How had he returned to this location without leaving tracks? What had happened during the hours he was missing? The investigation continued for weeks, but yielded few answers. Tyler's phone records showed only the text message he had sent. No other witnesses came forward. The barefoot tracks remained a mystery, with no explanation for how they could have been made in freezing temperatures or how they could have ended and resumed so improbably. Sarah filed a detailed report, including photographs and measurements of the strange tracks. But the case was ultimately ruled death by exposure with unexplained circumstances. In the months that followed, Sarah often found herself thinking about that night in the snow. She had always respected the traditional beliefs of her people, but had maintained a healthy skepticism about the more supernatural elements. Now, she wasn't so sure. The tracks she had seen, the impossible barefoot prints in the snow, the way they had joined Tyler's and then disappeared, defied rational explanation. Sometimes, late at night, Sarah would look out at the desert landscape and wonder what other mysteries lay hidden in the darkness, waiting to be discovered by those who dared to walk in the night. It was early December of 2017, when Officer Robert Kinsel began his night shift at the Navajo Nation Police Department in Crown Point, New Mexico. The winter night was cold and clear, with temperatures already dropping into the 20s as Robert collected his patrol assignment. He had been with the tribal police for 5 years, preferring the night shift for its relative quiet and the autonomy it afforded him. Crown Point and the surrounding area were familiar territory. Robert had grown up nearby and knew the land's history, including the abandoned uranium mines that dotted the landscape like scars. The first few hours of Robert's shift passed uneventfully. He patrolled the main highways and side roads, his headlights cutting through the darkness. Around 1:30 a.m., as he was driving south on State Road 371, his radio crackled to life. "All units, we have a report of a possible emergency at the abandoned uranium mine near Church Rock. Caller reports hearing what sounds like a child calling for help from inside the mine entrance. Caller wishes to remain anonymous." Robert immediately recognized the location. An old mine shaft that had been closed for decades, surrounded by fencing with warning signs posted at regular intervals. Robert was the closest unit, approximately 10 miles from the mine. He activated his emergency lights and accelerated, the landscape flying past in a blur of dark shapes and shadows. As he approached the turnoff to the mine, he slowed down, his training taking over. Abandoned mines were dangerous places, with unstable structures and potentially hazardous materials. He parked his vehicle a safe distance from the entrance, grabbed his flashlight and radio, and proceeded on foot toward the mine shaft. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to see clearly. Robert swept his flashlight beam back and forth, checking for any signs of activity. The fencing around the mine entrance appeared intact, with no obvious points of entry. As he drew closer, he could hear it. A faint sound that did indeed resemble a child's voice, calling out intermittently from within the mine shaft. "Hello? Is someone there?" Robert called out, his voice echoing in the cold night air. The sound from inside the mine stopped momentarily, then resumed, now sounding more desperate. Robert radioed dispatch. "Dispatch, Officer Kinsel at the Church Rock Mine. I can hear what sounds like a child calling for help from inside the mine shaft. The fencing appears secure, but I'm going to investigate further." The dispatcher's response was immediate. "Be careful, officer. That mine has been closed for over 30 years. Structural integrity is questionable." Robert acknowledged the warning as he examined the fencing more carefully. He found a section where the chain link had been cut, creating an opening just large enough for a child to slip through. Robert squeezed through the opening in the fence, his heart rate increasing despite his efforts to remain calm. The voice from inside the mine continued its intermittent calls for help, seeming to move deeper into the shaft with each repetition. Robert swept his flashlight beam across the mine entrance, noting the warning signs about radiation and unstable ground. He took a deep breath and stepped into the darkness of the mine entrance. The air inside was cold and damp, with a distinct metallic taste. Robert's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing rough-hewn walls supported by rotting timber beams. Water dripped from somewhere above, creating small puddles on the uneven floor. The child's voice seemed to be coming from approximately 50 yards ahead, around a bend in the tunnel. Robert moved forward cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the confined space. As Robert rounded the bend, the child's voice stopped abruptly. He swept his flashlight beam back and forth, but the tunnel appeared empty. "Hello? This is the Navajo Nation Police. Is someone there?" Robert called out, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. He waited, listening intently, but heard only the sound of dripping water and the faint hum of his flashlight's battery. Robert proceeded another 20 yards, his training taking over as he systematically checked the area. What he found made his blood run cold. Small footprints in the dust on the tunnel floor, definitely made by a child, leading deeper into the mine. Robert followed the tracks carefully, noting how they seemed fresh despite the mine's long abandonment. The footprints led to a side tunnel that branched off to the left. As Robert shone his flashlight down this passage, he saw something that defied explanation. The footprints simply ended at a solid rock wall, with no indication of where the child could have gone. Robert felt a cold dread wash over him as he examined the wall more closely. It was solid rock, with no cracks or openings large enough for a child to pass through. He ran his hands over the surface, finding nothing but cold stone. The child's voice began again, this time seeming to come from behind the solid wall. "Help me, I'm stuck." Robert stepped back, his mind racing to find a logical explanation. Could there be a hidden passage? A cave-in that had trapped the child? Robert radioed dispatch again, his voice now showing signs of strain. "Dispatch, Officer Kinsel. I found child's footprints inside the mine, leading to a solid rock wall. I can still hear the child's voice, but it seems to be coming from behind the wall. I'm going to need backup and possibly search and rescue with equipment to check for hidden passages or recent cave-ins." The dispatcher's response was immediate. "Backup is en route, officer. Please proceed with caution. That mine has had multiple structural failures over the years." Robert decided to retreat to the mine entrance to wait for backup. As he backed away from the wall, the child's voice changed, taking on a quality that was distinctly not childlike. "Don't leave. We're not finished with you yet." Robert froze, his flashlight beam fixed on the wall. The voice continued, now sounding like multiple voices speaking in unison. "Many have come here before you. None have left unchanged." Robert turned and moved quickly toward the mine entrance, his heart pounding in his chest. The voices followed him, echoing through the tunnels with an otherworldly quality. As he approached the entrance, he saw flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. Backup had arrived. Sergeant Daniel Wilson and 2 other officers met him at the mine entrance, their expressions concerned. "Kinsel, you okay? Dispatch said you were hearing voices." Robert took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. "I heard a child calling for help inside the mine. Found footprints leading to a solid wall. Then the voices changed, multiple voices, not human. They said things about people coming here before and not leaving unchanged." Daniel listened intently, his expression growing serious. "I've heard stories about this place, Robert. Old stories. Maybe there's some truth to them." The 4 officers entered the mine together, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. They found the child's footprints exactly as Robert had described, leading to the solid rock wall. But now there were no voices, only the sound of dripping water and the occasional creak of settling timber. They searched the area thoroughly, checking for hidden passages or recent cave-ins, but found nothing. The wall was solid, with no indication of how the footprints could have ended there or where the child could have gone. The search continued until dawn, with additional officers joining the effort. They found no other evidence of a child having been in the mine, no other tracks, no personal items, nothing. The child's voice was never heard again. Robert filed a detailed incident report, but left out some of the more unsettling details about the voices changing and their strange message. He knew how it would sound, crazy, unbelievable. Yet he knew what he had heard. In the weeks that followed, Robert researched the history of the Church Rock mine, looking for any explanation for what he had experienced. He found records of multiple accidents and deaths at the mine during its operational years, including several children who had wandered in and never come out. He also found references in local oral histories to strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena associated with the mine. Robert never returned to the Church Rock mine, but sometimes late at night, when the wind was blowing just right, he thought he could hear a faint child's voice calling for help from the direction of the abandoned shaft. It was mid-February of 2021 when Officer Carlos Vega began his patrol shift at the Navajo Nation Police Department in Kayenta, Arizona. The winter had been harsher than usual, with frequent snowstorms that made the rural roads treacherous. Carlos had been with the tribal police for 7 years, preferring the night shift despite its challenges. He knew the roads in his patrol area intimately. Every curve, every hill, every potential hazard that might present itself in the darkness. The night began uneventfully. Carlos patrolled the main highways, checking on the few vehicles he encountered and responding to a minor call about a family dispute that was quickly resolved. Around 2:30 a.m., as he was driving north on Highway 163 toward the Utah border, his headlights caught a figure walking along the shoulder of the road. The person was wrapped in a dark blanket, moving slowly through the snow that had accumulated on the roadside. Carlos slowed his vehicle, noting that the temperature had dropped to 14 degrees, dangerously cold for anyone to be walking outside without proper protection. Carlos pulled over approximately 50 yards ahead of the figure and activated his emergency lights. As he approached on foot, he could see that it was a young woman, possibly in her late teens or early 20s. She was wearing jeans and a light jacket, completely inadequate for the weather conditions. "Ma'am, are you okay? It's dangerous to be out here in this weather," Carlos called out as he drew closer. The woman turned, and Carlos could see that her face was pale, her lips slightly blue from the cold. "I'm trying to get home," she said, her voice trembling. "My car broke down a few miles back." Carlos radioed dispatch to report his location and the situation. "Dispatch, Officer Begay. I'm on Highway 163, approximately 5 miles south of the Utah border. I have a young woman here whose car has reportedly broken down. I'm going to give her a ride to the nearest shelter." The dispatcher acknowledged, and Carlos turned his attention back to the woman. "What's your name? Where were you headed?" The woman hesitated for a moment before responding. "I'm Sarah. I was trying to get to Mexican Hat. My boyfriend is waiting for me there." Carlos nodded, his police training taking over as he asked routine questions. "Where exactly did your car break down? Do you need assistance with it?" Sarah pointed south, down the highway. "About 3 miles that way, it just died. I tried calling for help, but my phone's dead." Carlos made a note of the location, planning to have dispatch contact the highway assistance team in the morning. For now, his priority was getting Sarah to safety. "Okay, Sarah, I can give you a ride to Mexican Hat. It's about 20 miles from here. Let's get you warmed up." Carlos led Sarah to his patrol vehicle, opening the passenger door for her. As she settled into the seat, he turned up the heat and handed her a blanket from his emergency kit. "Thank you," Sarah said, wrapping the blanket around herself. "I was getting really cold out there." Carlos nodded as he got back into the driver's seat. "No problem. We'll have you in Mexican Hat in about 30 minutes. He put the vehicle in drive and continued north on Highway 163. The drive was mostly silent, with only the sound of the tires on the snow-covered road and the occasional crackle of the radio. Carlos glanced over at Sarah periodically, noting that she seemed to be warming up gradually. She stared out the window, watching the dark landscape pass by. About 10 miles into the drive, Carlos noticed something strange. Sarah's reflection in the window seemed to flicker, becoming momentarily transparent. Carlos blinked, attributing it to fatigue or a trick of the light. As they approached the turnoff to Mexican Hat, Carlos spoke again. "Almost there, Sarah. Do you have a specific address where your boyfriend is waiting?" Sarah turned to look at him, and Carlos felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. Her eyes seemed to hold an ancient sadness, and her face appeared almost translucent in the dim light of the patrol car's interior. "You don't remember me, do you, Officer Begay?" Carlos felt a cold dread wash over him. "I'm sorry. Should I?" Sarah's form began to flicker more noticeably now, like a faulty hologram. "You picked me up on this road 3 years ago. February 14th, 2018. You gave me a ride to Mexican Hat then, too." Carlos's mind raced as he tried to recall the incident she was referring to. He had picked up many stranded motorists over the years, but the date she mentioned stood out. Valentine's Day 2018. He remembered that night clearly now. A blizzard, a multiple-car pileup near the Utah border, and a young woman who had died at the scene before he could reach her. Carlos pulled over to the side of the road, his hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. "Sarah Yazzie?" The woman's form flickered again, her expression now one of profound sadness. "I've been walking this road for 3 years, officer, looking for a ride that will finally take me home." Carlos felt tears welling in his eyes as the full realization of what was happening sank in. "You died that night, Sarah. In the pileup. I tried to get to you, but..." Sarah's form became more transparent now, her voice growing fainter. "I know. I remember now. Thank you for stopping for me tonight, and for stopping for me 3 years ago." As Carlos watched, Sarah's form dissolved completely, leaving only the blanket he had given her folded neatly on the passenger seat. Carlos sat there for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. He had heard stories about such encounters, spirits replaying their final moments, seeking resolution, but had never experienced anything like it himself. Carlos radioed dispatch, his voice strained. "Dispatch, Officer Begay. The young woman I reported picking up is no longer with me. I'm not sure how to explain this, but I believe she may have been Sarah Yazzie, the young woman who died in the pileup on Valentine's Day 3 years ago." There was silence on the other end for a moment before the dispatcher responded. "Copy that, officer. Take your time. We're here if you need to talk." Carlos took several deep breaths, then continued into Mexican Hat, where he stopped at a small convenience store to get a coffee and collect his thoughts. The following day, Carlos looked up the incident report from February 14th, 2018. There it was. Sarah Yazzie, age 19, pronounced dead at the scene of a multiple vehicle collision on Highway 163, approximately 5 miles south of the Utah border. The report noted that she had been walking to Mexican Hat to meet her boyfriend when the collision occurred. Carlos filed a supplemental report documenting his experience, but he knew most of his colleagues would be skeptical. He didn't care. He knew what he had experienced, and it had changed him in ways he couldn't yet articulate. In the weeks that followed, Carlos often found himself driving Highway 163 at night, even when it wasn't part of his patrol area. He never saw Sarah again, but sometimes, when the conditions were just right, cold, snowy, with a full moon, he thought he could see a faint figure walking along the shoulder of the road. A young woman wrapped in a dark blanket, still looking for a ride home. Carlos would always slow down, sometimes even stopping. But the figure would always vanish as he approached, leaving only the memory of a young woman whose journey had ended too soon on that lonely stretch of highway. It was late October of 2019 when Officer Jessica Mitchell began her evening shift at the Navajo Nation Police Department in Window Rock, Arizona. The autumn air carried the first hints of winter, with temperatures dropping rapidly after sunset. Jessica had transferred to the Navajo Nation Police from a department in Albuquerque 2 years earlier, seeking a deeper connection to her heritage. She had grown up hearing stories about the land and its mysteries from her grandmother, who had been born and raised in the region. The first hours of Jessica's shift passed quietly. A traffic stop for a broken headlight, a response to a noise complaint in a residential area, assistance to a stranded motorist on Highway 264. Around 11:30 p.m., Jessica decided to patrol the area around the iconic Window Rock Formation, a natural sandstone arch that gave the community its name. The formation was considered sacred by the Navajo people, and occasional reports of trespassers after hours made regular patrols necessary. As Jessica approached the formation, her headlights caught something unusual. A figure standing near the base of the rock, looking up at the window-like opening. Jessica slowed her vehicle, noting that the park was officially closed after sunset. The figure was tall and slender, dressed in what appeared to be traditional Navajo clothing, including a dark blanket wrapped around the shoulders. Jessica parked her vehicle a short distance away and approached on foot, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Navajo Nation Police?" Jessica called out as she drew closer. "The park is closed after hours. I'm going to need to ask you to leave." The figure turned slowly, and Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. The person's face was obscured by shadow, but there was something unsettling about their stillness. "I am watching," the figure said, their voice a low whisper that seemed to echo strangely in the night air. "Watching for the old ones." Jessica felt a sense of unease that she couldn't quite explain. "I understand. But the park is closed. You'll need to leave now." The figure turned back to face the rock formation, ignoring Jessica's request. "They come through the window sometimes, when the veil is thin." Jessica took a step closer, her training taking over despite the strange feeling creeping over her. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification. What's your name?" The figure turned again, and Jessica could now see that their eyes seemed to glow with a faint blue light in the darkness. "I have many names. The people called me the Watcher. I have been here since before the rocks were formed." Jessica felt a cold dread wash over her, but she stood her ground. "I don't know what this is about, but I need you to leave now, or I'll have to place you under arrest for trespassing." The figure raised a hand, pointing toward the window-like opening in the rock formation. "Look, they are coming now." Jessica turned to look, her professional instincts warring with the sense of unease that had grown stronger with each passing moment. As she stared at the opening, she saw it. A strange, pulsing light, blue-white in color, emanating from within the rock. The light grew brighter, and Jessica thought she could see shapes moving within it, indistinct but somehow menacing. Jessica turned back to the figure, but to her astonishment, they were gone. She swept her flashlight beam back and forth, but found no sign of the person who had been standing there moments before. The ground showed no footprints in the sandy soil, no indication that anyone had been there at all. Jessica felt her heart racing as she radioed dispatch. "Dispatch, Officer Mitchell at Window Rock. I encountered an individual here, but they have now vanished. I'm also observing unusual lights emanating from the rock formation itself." The dispatcher's response came immediately. "Copy that, officer. Backup is en route. Please maintain observation and report any changes." Jessica continued to watch the strange light, which now seemed to be forming distinct shapes within the window-like opening. Figures that moved with an impossible fluidity. neither human nor animal in form. As she watched, one of the figures seemed to detach from the others and move toward the opening, as if preparing to emerge. Jessica felt a primal fear that she had never experienced before. But she forced herself to remain calm and professional. "Dispatch, one of the figures appears to be approaching the opening. I'm moving back to my vehicle for safety." As Jessica backed away, she heard a voice behind her, the same low whisper she had heard earlier. They have been waiting for a long time, for someone to open the way for them. Jessica spun around, but again saw no one. Backup arrived 5 minutes later, led by Sergeant Thomas Benally. As Thomas approached, Jessica could see the concern on his face. "Mitchell, what's going on? Dispatch said you were seeing lights and someone vanished." Jessica pointed toward the rock formation. "There was a person here, dressed in traditional clothing. He called himself the Watcher. Then he just disappeared. And those lights?" Thomas followed her gaze, his eyes widening as he saw the pulsing light emanating from the window-like opening. The two officers watched together as the lights gradually dimmed and then disappeared entirely. "I've never seen anything like that," Thomas said, his voice filled with wonder. "My grandmother used to tell stories about the window rock being a portal between worlds, but I always thought they were just stories." Jessica nodded, still trying to process what she had experienced. "The person I spoke to, his eyes glowed blue, and he said he was watching for the old ones to come through the window." A thorough search of the area revealed no evidence of anyone having been there besides the officers themselves. No footprints, no other traces. The incident report Jessica filed that night was carefully worded to document the events without sounding overly sensational. But even so, she knew most people would find it difficult to believe. Thomas, who had witnessed the lights, supported her account, but neither could offer a rational explanation for what they had seen. In the weeks that followed, Jessica researched the legends surrounding Window Rock, speaking with elders and historians in the community. She found multiple references to a figure known as the Watcher, a guardian who stood between worlds, preventing beings from other realms from entering the human world. She also found references to times when the veil between worlds was thin, allowing passage if the Watcher was distracted or chose to allow it. Jessica never saw the Watcher again, but she often found herself driving past Window Rock during her patrols, sometimes stopping to watch the formation in the darkness. On clear nights, when the moon was full and the air was still, she thought she could see a faint blue light pulsing within the window-like opening. And sometimes, if she looked closely, she thought she could see a tall, slender figure standing at the base of the rock, still watching, still waiting, still guarding the boundary between worlds. It was early April of 2020 when Officer Mark So began his night shift at the Navajo Nation Police Department in Chinle, Arizona. Spring had arrived late to the high desert, with occasional snow still dusting the higher elevations. Mark had been with the tribal police for 4 years, transferring from a department in Tucson after becoming disillusioned with urban policing. He appreciated the quiet vastness of the Navajo Nation, the sense of connection to the land and its people that he had never felt in the city. The first few hours of Mark's shift passed uneventfully. He patrolled the main roads through Canyon de Chelly, checking on the few vehicles he encountered and responding to a minor call about a loose dog that was quickly reunited with its owner. Around 1:45 a.m., as he was driving east on Route 7, his headlights caught something unusual. A vehicle pulled over on the shoulder of the road, its driver's door standing open. As Mark drew closer, he could see that it was a late-model sedan, still running with its headlights cutting through the darkness. Mark pulled over behind the vehicle, positioning his patrol car at an angle for safety. He approached cautiously, his flashlight beam cutting through the night. The vehicle was empty, with no sign of the driver or any passengers. The keys were in the ignition, the engine still running. Mark radioed dispatch to report his location and the situation. "Dispatch, Officer Tsuo. I'm on Route 7, approximately 8 miles east of Chinle. I have an abandoned vehicle here, still running with the driver's door open. No sign of the occupants." The dispatcher acknowledged, and Mark began a systematic search of the area. The ground was soft from recent rain, making it ideal for tracking. Mark found several sets of footprints leading away from the vehicle toward the canyon rim, approximately 50 yards away. What was unusual was that the tracks seemed to end abruptly at the edge of the canyon, with no indication of where the person might have gone. Mark swept his flashlight beam back and forth, but the darkness below seemed to absorb the light completely. Mark called for backup, knowing that searching the canyon at night would be dangerous and require additional personnel. As he waited for other officers to arrive, he continued to examine the vehicle and surrounding area. The car was registered to a family from Phoenix, but there was no other information available about why it might be here or where its occupants had gone. Inside the car, Mark found a woman's purse on the passenger seat, a child's car seat in the back, and several suitcases in the trunk, suggesting a family traveling together. As Mark examined the vehicle more carefully, he found something that made his blood run cold. A small child's shoe lying just outside the driver's door, as if it had fallen off when someone exited the vehicle. The shoe was tiny, no more than 3 inches long, clearly belonging to a toddler. Mark felt a cold dread wash over him as he considered what might have happened to the family, particularly the child who had worn this shoe. Backup arrived 10 minutes later, led by Sergeant Rachel Yazzie. Rachel approached cautiously, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "What have you got, Mark?" Mark pointed to the vehicle and then to the canyon rim. "Abandoned vehicle, still running. Footprints lead to the canyon rim, then disappear. And this..." Mark handed Rachel the child's shoe, his expression grim. Rachel's face grew serious as she examined the tiny shoe. "This isn't good. We need to organize a search team immediately." The search began at dawn, with multiple officers and volunteers from the community combing the area. The canyon was searched thoroughly, with teams rappelling down the cliff faces and others scanning the canyon floor from above. As the day progressed, the search expanded to cover several miles of canyon in both directions. What they found was deeply disturbing. No sign of the family, no additional tracks, no evidence that anyone had entered or left the canyon. The investigation revealed that the vehicle belonged to the Martinez family from Phoenix. 35-year-old James, 33-year-old Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Emily. They had been reported missing by relatives 2 days earlier when they failed to arrive at a family gathering in Albuquerque. The last known contact with the family was a phone call James had made to his sister from a gas station in Holbrook, approximately 2 hours from where the vehicle was found. As the search continued into its second day, investigators made another puzzling discovery. Additional footprints that appeared to join the Martinez family's tracks, approximately halfway between their vehicle and the canyon rim. These new tracks were strange. Barefoot prints despite the cool temperatures, with an unusually long stride and a depth that suggested tremendous weight. The tracks followed the families to the canyon rim, then continued beyond the edge, somehow descending the vertical cliff face with no apparent means of support. The search was officially called off after 5 days, with no sign of the Martinez family or any indication of what had happened to them. The vehicle was impounded and processed for evidence, but yielded no clues beyond what had already been discovered. The case remained open, but inactive, with investigators unable to explain how a family of 3 could simply vanish, leaving their vehicle running and a child's shoe behind. In the months that followed, Mark often found himself thinking about that night on Route 7. He had been a police officer for many years, but nothing in his experience could explain what had happened to the Martinez family. The strange tracks that had joined theirs, the way they had descended the canyon cliff face, it defied all logic and reason. Mark researched similar cases in the area, finding several other instances of people who had vanished under mysterious circumstances near Canyon de Chelly. Sometimes, late at night, Mark would drive out to the spot where the Martinez vehicle had been found. Parking his patrol car and walking to the canyon rim, he would stand there in the darkness, looking down into the canyon, wondering what secrets it held. The official explanation for the Martinez family's disappearance remained unknown. But Mark knew there was more to the story, something ancient and mysterious that lived in the canyon, something that occasionally reached out to claim those who ventured too close to its domain. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable, but nowhere is this more true than across the Navajo Nation. These 7 accounts, drawn from the official logs of the tribal police, represent only a fraction of the unusual encounters that occur under the vast desert sky. They are stories that speak to a reality beyond our everyday understanding, where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds become thin, and things that should not exist make their presence known. From the empty highway, where a voice called for help from a place no one could reach, to the canyon lights that moved with impossible grace, to the footprints that appeared and vanished in the snow. Each account follows a similar pattern. A normal night, a routine patrol, a standard procedure. Then, an intrusion, something that violates the known laws of nature and technology. The officers and dispatchers who experienced these events were trained professionals, accustomed to dealing with emergencies and crises. Yet nothing in their training could prepare them for encounters that defied rational explanation. What connects these stories is not just their unexplained nature, but the profound sense of ancient mystery they evoke. The abandoned mine where voices called from behind solid rock, the vanishing hitchhiker who was still seeking her way home, the watcher at Window Rock who guarded a portal between worlds, the family that vanished at the canyon's edge, and the voice that spoke through every radio at once. These are not random occurrences. They suggest a hidden world that exists parallel to our own, a world with its own rules, its own inhabitants, and its own agenda. The silence that follows these encounters is perhaps the most unsettling element of all. In each case, the phenomenon ends as suddenly as it begins, leaving behind more questions than answers. No definitive explanations, no conclusive evidence, no closure. Only the quiet testimony of those who were there, left to grapple with the memory of what they saw and heard. This silence is not empty. It is filled with the weight of what remains unsaid, the presence of what remains unseen. The Navajo people have always understood this. Their oral traditions are filled with stories of beings that walk in the night, of places where the veil between worlds is thin, of powers that command respect and caution. For the officers of the Navajo Nation Police, these stories are not merely folklore. They are a part of the landscape they patrol, a reality they must acknowledge even as they fulfill their duty to serve and protect their community. Each night shift carries the possibility of an encounter that will challenge their understanding of the world. These 7 accounts remind us that there are still mysteries in this world, phenomena that exist beyond the limits of our current knowledge. They speak to the humility required when confronting the unknown, the courage needed to face what cannot be explained, and the wisdom to recognize that we are not always the masters of the world we inhabit. The desert night holds many secrets, and sometimes, just sometimes, it chooses to reveal them to those who are paying attention. If you or someone you know has a true story to share, leave it in the comments below. The quiet documentation of these experiences helps us understand the boundaries of our